All right, welcome back. Just before we get into our interview, news just in. Renowned lawyer Nzamba Kitonga is reportedly dead. He was one of the drafters of the 2010 Constitution, senior counsel as well. We are receiving news that he has passed on. Of course, more details on that later on in the broadcast, but we wanted to at least notify you to that sad news. Now, for years, women have borne the brunt of gender-based violence, and the numbers back this up. It's estimated that 14% of Kenyan girls and women aged between 15 and 49 have experienced sexual violence at least once in their lifetime. For Kenyan boys and men in that same demographic, that number is 6%. Well, very little is said about that 6%, though. Most male survivors of domestic violence or sexual abuse are sentenced to silence, but one has decided to speak up. Tonight, I want to introduce you to Onyango Otieno, or Rick's Poet as he's known on stage. He's a poet and co-founder of Fatuma's Voice, a social justice platform. But tonight on Citizen Weekend, we bring you his story of pain, healing and triumph. And after that, we'll have a panel discussion on the state of masculinity today with Job Akuno of the Men Engage Alliance and Mariga Thuevi, a columnist and thought leader on masculinity. Watch.
Home had mixed things. We had happy days and like any other home. But as I grew up, I think my father became a different man with time. The more he progressed in his career, the more money came, and it came with a lot of things. It came with more alcohol, it came with more fighting at home, and that environment was very toxic, and it became more toxic with time. One day when I was 10 years old, my dad came back home. He was looking for a Bill Cosby novel that he'd borrowed a kid he used to tutor. And he didn't find the novel in the house, and he suspected that I had stolen it. But I hadn't. And by that time, I was 10. I'd still like 5 shillings here and there to go buy mutura and patko and sweets. But a novel, stealing a novel felt like a bank heist. I couldn't, that was too high for me. And he starts beating me up with this telephone copper wires and he strips me off naked and lashes my body with, and my dad used to beat you with his soul. It was hard. And it was difficult, and my mom was just watching there helpless. So in like 15 minutes of this battle, my body is growing frail and I'm bleeding and I'm sweating and couldn't take it anymore. And I'm starting to feel really, really weak. And my little child intelligence is telling me, you know what, this man tonight, he's different. He might actually just take you out. So we have to lie today. We have to lie that we stole a book we didn't. And I told him that, and I remember him looking at me in my eyes, and he was, he was angry, and he said, I'm gonna do something to you that you'll never forget. True to it. So he walks out as if he'd planned all that. He comes back, and I'm still on the floor crying. He comes back with a sisal rope this time, and he ties my hands. And he smears part of some paraffin on my left hand and strikes off the matchstick and puts the flame on my hand. And so I have this mark here. And I think my brain protected me from that moment because I can't quite remember how it felt. But I know I was in pain and I couldn't walk for 2 weeks. Couldn't go to school, couldn't do anything. I was bandaged, I wasn't, And that's the night my life changed, because I felt like something had been torn inside me, my innocence, my purity. I was violated, and yet I didn't have a language even to express that. And the trauma began there. That's the root. And yet the abuse didn't stop. Finished high school. For me, it was just miraculous. And then I managed to go to A-level in Uganda. And so this is when another stream of abuse happened to me. When I was now 20 years old. I've done my Form 5, I'm heading to my Form 6. And the housekeeper or house help who had just come in that December 2008, we were left with her at home now in January when schools were opening in Kenya, 2009. And the Ugandan system that time would close for 2 months. So in January I was at home, and this girl manipulated me and forced me to have sex with her. And even at that time, I didn't know that was a violation because most people around me, most boys around me, were talking about that kind of stuff like some kind of fun. And I remember me feeling this thing was done against my will, on top of coercion. The way it was done, like, it wasn't physical. And this is like, the more I grew, the more I understood how we view rape from a very narrow lens. You know, our understanding of rape is it has to be very physical, somebody pinning you down. No, you could be coerced into sex without you knowing. Somebody who has more psychological power than you can manipulate you into having sex with them. And that's what really happened to me. And it was 10 years later that I discovered that I was actually violated. And it was like, whoa, something happened to me back there. It's not been easy to get myself out of that because I wanted a different life. I wanted to speak. That pain wanted me silent. And I remember when I was 16, that's when like my writing started, because I felt I was in so much pain. If I didn't say something, I was gonna die. I was in so much pain. My mother was in pain. I could tell my father was in pain. And then where else to go? So poetry became my let out. And thank God I did, because I took charge of my life. That was me taking charge of my life. And since then, I've never looked back. And I'm so proud that I didn't wait, because I don't know what else would have happened to me if I kept quiet. And I spoke up, and I continue to speak up.
Job and Mariga, thank you so much for joining me for this discussion. You know, whenever we talk about masculinity, the state of it right now, we really should kind of begin with the boy child. You know, these are the young men who are now being formed into the men that will soon lead our societies. But when you look at the current state of boys, how they're socialized, you know, the views of masculinity that's kind of been fed to them either through the media or through the men in their lives. What's your take on it? So let me begin with you, Job.
Over time, you know, society has constructed this man who is supposed to be this strong, this forceful, this aggressive man, this man with no emotions and therefore doesn't cry, doesn't express how they feel. And this eventually leads to a man that is torn between the realities of our times and the societal expectations. So you have a young man growing into a society that expects him to adhere strictly to the traditional masculine roles that are relative, because then they are defined by society at different times. And so in our times, what we think we need to do is to redefine how we are raising young men and boys so that they can be able to deal with the fact that masculinity, just like all other gender roles, are time specific and they are changing over time, and that they need to be able to connect with themselves, live with their feelings and express themselves in ways that can make them more at peace with themselves, but also at peace with the society in which they live.
You know, Job mentioned something really important, and that's engaging emotion. It's something that many times boys and men are told to stay off of. And in a culture where they're told to, quote unquote, man up, how do they do that?
And I feel like we need an intergenerational conversation around emotions. So not only top down, because a lot of our own fathers are victims of their past, they're victims of their upbringing. And I feel that the changes happen over time, and I feel that younger men have greater leeway and greater space to express their emotion. And I feel that part of it is that now men need to do it upwards, right? Younger men need to allow older men to express emotion.
I mean, the African culture, we had setups where, you take them through rites of passage. You're no longer a boy, you're now a man. And, you kind of understand from that process, this is what it looks like. Now, we've urbanized, we've modernized, though people still go through the rites of passage exercises. But what kind of has taken that position and that place where, boys were transitioned into men through ceremonies like this, and it was clear. I know some people argue that, some of those processes are not necessarily healthy, but in some instances, it did grow boys into men. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, I am conflicted on some of the rituals that boys went through in terms of the level of indoctrination that also produced, because then, as you'd have observed, most of the traditional circumcision rites or rites of passages essentially did bring out the notions that as a man, you are supposed to be this tough. If you look at the way some of the boys, for example, are circumcised, it's really a very punitive process where you are supposed to withstand pain and all those kind of experiences. And then the messaging is that, now you're a man and you're supposed to dominate and all that. So I am a bit conflicted on the role that some of that did too. But coming to this point of in time is that we also need to see the churches, for example, have come in to bridge the gap in terms of alternative rites of passages, and a number of churches are now having programs where they're actually taking boys through a series of trainings on life skills and societal expectations.
And speaking of that, Mariga, when you think of terms like boys will be boys, when we're talking about men calling out each other and the locker room talk, some would push back and say, but you're taking away what it means to be a man and how we socialize. I mean, women have their moments, where they hang out, have a glass of wine and chat about life and the men in their lives and whatnot. So, this is the equivalent to that. How then do you get men to view socializing differently? Because for them, they're saying, this is what we do. This is how we feel like men. This is how we discuss things.
So I usually challenge people that if the only brand and form of masculinity that you recognize is the kind that is oppressive, the kind that hurts other people, you need to sit and rethink what your masculinity is, right? No one's trying to take away masculinity, quote unquote. No one's trying to make, quote unquote, men more like women. This is usually a discussion made by people that when we're having conversations about redefining masculinity, that we're trying to emasculate men, right? One, you cannot emasculate someone. Your gender and expression remain the same no matter what else someone else thinks. It's not an external expression. Your masculinity is internal. No one can take it away from you. We need to think the way we handle masculinity to something that makes everybody happy, right? Many times the one bench point I have for any decision is that, is this how you define yourself by? Okay, fine. Is this harmful? Okay, fine. If it's harmful, it's not necessary. There are many harmful elements of masculinity which have been painted to be a necessary element. And so entangling those from the elements of masculinity which work tends to be hard because people mesh the two to one. And there's very rarely you can call someone to have thoughts about who they are, and just self-analysis of men needs to be a bit higher, because a lot of these things that men deem locker talk that find acceptable, but they only find they find acceptable within their own circle, but they would find it unacceptable if it's done to women in their own proximity, women they're related to, women that they know. So they understand oppression, but only when they are at the end of it, or someone else who they know or care about is at the end of it. So men are viewing oppression upwards, but they need more self-awareness and to understand that this is exactly what they are doing, there's no difference between what they castigate in other people and what they do on a daily basis.
Job, let me bring you in on a topic that we hardly talk about in relation to men, and that's abuse. And that's because by just the look at numbers, men suffer less abuse than women do. And then, in most cases, they are the aggressors or the perpetrators. But when they become the victims, when they now incur the trauma that comes with having gone through abuse of all kinds, what happens? What needs to happen? Because many of them are almost sentenced to silence. They don't talk about it, for fear that you'll be stigmatized, for fear that you'll be seen as weaker. Why couldn't you have fought off your aggressor or your attacker? But, what happens in those cases?
There is evidence that a number of boys and young men are facing one form of violence or another. One is that we need to really continue to engage in making boys and men realize that violence is not the only way in terms of resolving conflicts. So either way, both boys and women. But two is that when it does occur, the boys, the young men, and even older men need to appreciate that, yes, it has occurred, that they need to seek for recourse. And there are a number of recourses. There could be violence that requires medical attention. There could be those that require administrative action, either reporting to the police and all that kind of action. There are those that may require mediation, where some family or individuals then find lasting solutions to some of the issues that are causing the potential violence or continued violence. So we need to be able to have a notion that to be a man does not necessarily equate you to violence, either in terms of meeting it out, or that if it happens, you are less of a human being or you are less of a man. And therefore, they should feel that they can still be able to seek for a recourse one way or another.
Thank you so much, Job and Mariga. That's all the time we have. I hope you keep the conversation going on social media, #CitizenWeekend, as we continue to challenge some of the existing perceptions of what masculinity is and begin to cultivate a new and fresh and more positive view of what it means to be a boy and a man in our African society.